Hey there, if you're ready to take your mobile notary and loan signing business to the next level, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Sign and Thrive podcast with Bill Soroka, that's me, and friends. Let's go and get it.
Go and get it. Go and get it. Go and get it while the night is young.
Hey everyone, as you're going out and getting it, remember that time is money. If you want to save 15 minutes per appointment and still stay in compliance and best practice standards for your notary journal, check out the Notary eJournal by Jurat Inc. It's designed to help improve your workflow and efficiency, and it allows you to capture signatures and fingerprints digitally right on your phone or tablet. This is the journal of the future. If you're ready to save time, money, and wow your customers, try the Notary eJournal for just $1 at notarycoach.com/eJournal. All right. Welcome, guys, to the Sign and Thrive podcast. Today, we're talking about the exciting world of remote online notarization and all the plus sides, the pluses, the minuses, the ups, the downs, that whole process. And I'm here with my very special guest, Amy Seitz, founder and creator of Cyberize It. Welcome, Amy.
Well, hello there, Bill. I'm so glad that you invited me on this.
I am too. I think it's past due that you join me on one of these podcasts. I love that you're all over Clubhouse. And that's one thing I admire about you, Amy, is your presence on Clubhouse, because that's where we ended up meeting. But you're constantly finding ways to deliver value and help other notaries. So thank you for all you contribute to our community.
Oh, no problem. You know, one of the reasons that I keep trying to chime into those is there's so many misconceptions and misunderstandings. It's not even with the world of RON or REN or IPEN and understanding the different terminology and how people are asking questions, and one can do this and one can do that, not this other. And I really wanted to be kind of like the sounding board, because I've read all of the laws and I've really tried to research all of the if, ands, or buts. So I'm hoping that it helps people become better notaries.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that it is already. And you really highlighted one of the biggest challenges for teaching, coaching, or training with remote online notarization, because not only are all 50 states different, and not only all 50 states don't even approve RON yet, but the ones who do have their own set of laws. And then on top of that, there's the technology platforms that all have their own way of doing things too. So it's really difficult. So it's understandable why it's so convoluted and confusing for people.
Oh, yes. And if you're not, one of the pitfalls of this is every state's different. Yes. But at the bare root of everything, all of the states teach the law, which they need to. Don't get me wrong. But they don't teach any notary how to sell it. Yeah. And that also hurts, because when you don't know the whys or the hows of what functionality you need, you can't sell it to the right market. You can't create your correct client base. And you're going to run into these people that have no way of validating with the online session through the ID proofing. And you're just at a standstill and you just lose that momentum that you think you had, because now you've got to completely recreate the wheel on your end to find a new target audience. And hopefully that foundational aspect of it helps bring the awareness to who can. And if they can't, here's what you do. You know, it isn't an end all. It's a pivot.
Well, that's awesome. And that's nice and deep, and just the way I want to go with this. Let's rewind it a little bit, though, in case there's a listener. I mean, because RON is relatively new to our world. So if there's a listener who maybe doesn't understand what remote online notarization is, can you define that for them?
Sure. So the remote online notarization, or RON for short, you'll hear that a lot, and everybody's like, who's RON and how do I get to know him? It is the ability to notarize documents in a virtual setting. A client will go through a specified ID proofing type of methodology, and that varies by state law. The client would connect with the notary via an audio-visual session that allows them to see and hear everyone that is signing the document through the entire process. And then everyone's going to sign with electronic signatures, and the notary will have an electronic notary stamp. And when everything's all said and done, the document's encrypted, so it cannot be changed after the session's over. What's really great about RON is there's no writer's cramp and no paper cuts.
That's a huge benefit too. Now I can see why so many people are drawn to the idea of RON, right? The idea of being able to sit on your couch and notarize anyone almost in the world, depending on what state you're in and the rules regarding that. But what are some of the downsides that you've discovered in your as you're going through this and coaching others along the way?
Oh, so it is not for everyone. The idea that you can service any client anywhere, depending upon your state, of course, does bring up some issues. I was in North Carolina last week, and some of the notaries there were talking about, well, up in the hills, there's no cell signal, there's no internet. How would we do it if we were at one of these clients' house? And this is in the United States. And I'm like, well, then you can't. If there's no cell, that means there's no hotspot, which means there's no internet. You can't do it. So if your client is in an area that they have no internet at all and no cell signal, then they're not going to be able to access it. And I've run into situations where people were overseas and they were in areas where they had to drive 2 or 3 hours in order to get to an area to connect. And, you've got to have that good connection. Otherwise, it's not going to make it go. So while we think it could service the whole world, it really can't. We are limited by the bandwidth of technology. So
yeah, good point. Good point. And it seems like there's good candidates for this service, and there's just non-candidates for this service, almost like any other business, right? Or any other line of service you have.
Oh, yes, definitely. And one thing that works for one is not going to work for another. And some of it isn't even at the fault or even at the control of the signer. For instance, like the ID proofing system of knowledge-based authentication questions. I find that ID proofing methodology very unfair. It puts a lot of citizens and non-citizens at a disadvantage because if you're 18 years old, you have no history, you have no public records to pull from. And that, in case anyone doesn't know, knowledge-based authentication is 5 questions about you that only you will know, because who knows you better than you? But the idea behind it is it's going to ask you what color car you drive. It's going to ask you what the numbers are with the address you lived at. It's going to ask you maybe who owns a loan on who you financed a car through or who you financed your house through. But if you're 18, you've never done any of that. Right. So you're not going to have that. So you're not going to be eligible just because of circumstantial evidence, situations. But on the flip side, you get somebody that is 70, 80, 90 years old, and it asks them a question from when they were 20.
Yeah.
And the one of the questions I absolutely hate, and it's one of the questions on my platform too, but is which hospital is closest to this address? Okay. So let's say you lived at this address 15 years ago and you moved away. You've never went back. You've never stayed in touch. And a hospital was built 9 years ago. And now today, that hospital is the closest one to that address. And it's asking you questions in real time. So today, which hospital is closest to that address? And now it's a hospital that wasn't in existence when you actually lived there. So how would you be expected to know that?
Right. Wow.
Oh, yeah. I do not like KBA if you don't get it.
Well, I've heard some of the most frustrating stories, and I love that you brought up that example too, because there are people who are, upper in age, and their questions go back. Like I even had one when I was testing out. I'm like, what color was your, and it had the brand of car that I had. And I'm like, I have no idea. That was back in my partying days in the first place. And I only had the car 6 months. How am I supposed to know that? Yeah. I'm like, I failed my own KBA test.
Exactly. So you don't know you very well. The other thing is if you own the same type of car, but different colors. So maybe in the 80s, you owned a Toyota Camry that was silver. And in the 90s, you owned a Toyota Camry that was black. And it says, what color was your Toyota Camry? Well, which one? I owned multiple, So lots of issues.
So that's some of the challenges.
So
definitely.
That's
and
one.
We're in the infancy of this thing, right? Technically, right? Even though the first RON state was 2012 in Virginia. So, I mean, still we're 10 years in, but in the grand scheme of things, there's still a lot to learn.
Oh, definitely. And you also have to remember a lot of the other states, I think before COVID, we were only at 10 states that allowed it, and the rest have come on board since COVID hit. And you also have to remember that Virginia allows for multiple different ID proofing methods that many other states don't allow for. So when these other states have instituted their laws, they did not give us such a robust opportunity. So really, when you were looking at Virginia as a test or the first one, they have other options. So they didn't necessarily count on one specific ID proofing. Now you look at Ohio's laws, which is where I am, it specifically says, I have to have KBA, I have to have ID credential analysis, and those are my only options for verifying the identity of a signer. When it limits us like that, then we start seeing the problems with it. That's when it really comes to the headlight and right there in your face. So I know I met with the state of Colorado this week. They're doing a sunset review of their RON or notarial laws in general. And I was able to bring up some of those points. And they said that they had not even looked at it from that perspective. And I gave them the opportunity to try the biometrics aspect as well, so that they could see what a biometric analysis does and how it's much more in line with validating that person right there versus gathering a whole bunch of historic data. And I hope I made an impression.
Tell me more about that. What is biometric?
So
assessment?
Biometrics, yeah. So a lot of states, Virginia, Florida, Wyoming, Montana, and Louisiana will allow you to validate a signer through biometric technology. And when we think biometrics, we think, oh my gosh, they want my blood or my fingerprints or my eye retina scan, but that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is you upload your ID and it has your picture on your ID. And then you take a selfie. And what we do is we analyze your facial structure. Are your eyes the same distance apart? Is your nose the same shape to the picture of your ID? Your jawline. And I will tell you, weight and hair color, that doesn't matter. Makeup on, makeup off, hair up, hair down. No, that's not what we're looking at. And I can tell you, I lost 100 pounds and I did it with a picture from before and now. And it worked just fine. So the only time you would run into problems with that would be if someone had some kind of facial reconstruction, facelifts, but that would be something that they would know would impact that. And they would need to find an ID that has the most current image. So
that's interesting. So are you saying, so it's not the notary's not somehow measuring this, but you have technology that measures those biometrics?
Yes, it has to be a third-party vendor, and it literally will put it through this comparative analysis, kind of like if you think about when children are lost or missing and they do that age progression, think that same methodology. They take the facial components and they measure and they analyze down to this little score. It's like getting a quiz. And as long as it's a ratio of 70% or higher, the system validates that you are really yourself.
That is fascinating. And there's only a handful of states that have authorized this so far.
Correct.
Do you think, is that in the future? Is that the next step of the evolution of this thing?
I think so. I'm also on MISMO, which is the Mortgage Institute. I don't even know the full name of it. It's part of the Bankers Association, and it's the governing standard for RON best practices when it comes to software. And in their new release that's coming out hopefully the beginning of next year, they are going to emphasize that biometrics is a good alternative to KBA. Now, like I told Colorado, I don't want to say don't ever offer KBA because some people don't want to even think about doing biometrics, and that's okay. So it depends on the client. I think the notary should be able to give the client options and make the client comfortable because all of this is brand new technology, not just to the notary, but to our clients as well. So we need to make sure everyone's on board with however they feel the best way to validate is.
I think that's a great way of thinking about it. Because if you think, depending on your state, right, a notary has multiple ways to take ID. You know, they could use a driver's license, they could use a passport. Some states, if those aren't available, they could use a credible witness. So it's just like having backups for your backups.
Exactly. And a way to pivot. Okay, well, that won't work for you. Let's look at it this perspective. How do we make this scenario work?
Even though I haven't been one of the early adopters of RON necessarily, I'm still just fascinated by this idea, and I can't wait to see where it goes and how it evolves. But you bring up an interesting question with the selfies, because I know there's a technology issue with the general public and doing these RON appointments too, right? Mm-hmm. The general public doesn't know how. Well, I'm trying to think of how to word this question. How frustrating is it for notaries working with the general public who doesn't know how to use the technology? Is that a big deal?
Well, you've got to think about this from our perspective. As a notary perspective, the goal is we will be doing these multiple times. Every time is not your first. So as you get going, you're going to hear trigger words and you're going to pick up on images or patterns of what the client's doing or doing wrong. And when they say, oh, I could just click this, and you're like, wait, hold on. No, you want to click the one on the left, not the one on the right. You want to click the blue button, not the green button, or something along those lines. You know, the biggest thing that I see that the clients do, it isn't that they can't ultimately get connected. It's they'll take the picture of their ID backwards. They'll put the back where the front goes and the front where the back goes. And it's an instant fail because when it validates that ID, it's looking for components on that image. And when that image doesn't have it, it's a fake. Even though it's not really a fake, they just did it backwards. So making sure that that's expressed and also making sure the client understands that every single process, while it's frustrating, is required, and it's required for their own protection. So as long as they don't rush through it, usually we don't have any problems. But as the notary, once you get the hang of it, you're really good at explaining it to the client and giving them those verbal cues. So it doesn't necessarily get so tough on the notary then. It's definitely the first time's always hard for the client, but as the notary progresses, they learn how to accommodate that and adapt their terminology. You know, for instance, when we talk about this with each other, it's great to say RON. We know what RON is. But when I'm talking about this with a client, I don't use the word RON. I use the word virtual. We are do this all virtually. We're going to do a virtual notarization or an electronic one, however you want to phrase it, because that changes their perception. You know,
That's a valuable lesson right there, because so many of us get caught up in our own jargon. We just assume that the general public knows the same jargon that we do, and that's not the case.
Right. And when you do that, it can get frustrating for the client because they're just like, what? Who? Kind of like, who is that Ron? And
who's Ron?
No, yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, okay. So we're going to move into talking about the opportunities here in just a second, but I want to address too, even though the pandemic, I think, has lowered the barrier and allowed people to see the value of remote online notarization, there's still some holdouts. There's still some people who really resist this kind of technology for various reasons. What do you think is the biggest resistance you hear from notaries right now?
I hear a lot of them say, but I still want to have the engagement. I still want to go out. I love meeting the people. I love seeing them. I just want that physical contact, and that's okay. The mobile notary or the in-person notary is not going to go away, and not everyone's going to flip their business plan to be all virtual unless that's what they want. But I definitely think every notary needs to be open to the concept that times are changing, that you do need to have this in your back pocket as an option, or have a notary buddy that does, so that you don't lose clients. Because if the client decides that they would rather do this, or that they need to do it because it's a predicament on their end, that's the only solution, wouldn't you rather be the solution to their problem versus the word of, oh, I'm sorry, I can't help you there. I don't know that one. It's always better to offer opportunities, even when you're not the opportunity, because they'll respect you for that at the end. So excellent. That would be the biggest thing I hear from notaries.
I love that advice too. You want to be the resource for your customer, even if you're not the person doing the job. If you can refer, and this just adds to the importance of networking on Clubhouse, in your training groups, on these Zoom training calls, TNT, all of those things where you can meet people, notaries that you can trust to refer your customers to. That's excellent advice. What about fraud though? Because I still hear little whisperings of how people think Ron is more apt to be allow for fraud to happen. What's your take on it?
I haven't seen fraud. I haven't seen someone trying to do something intentionally wrong. What I've seen is people not understanding the entire concept and thinking, well, because it's virtual, they really don't need to be here. So I'm going to upload this for my husband. And then we get on the Zoom and I'm like, oh, you really did need to see him? Oh, okay. Well, that's a cancel. You let me know when he's available. We'll reset it up. No problem. And I think it goes to the intent. If they're really trying to do something illegal, people are going to go really hog wire and try to figure out how to do that. That's true in any industry. But there's so many safeguards that Ron's process puts into place. At some level, there's going to be questions rising from it. Either they're not going to be able to answer the questions, or the ID they upload is not going to match the actual client. And then when the notary gets on there, at the bare root of it, the notary is the one that puts it all together. No platform, no person should ever tell a notary, just do it. That's not okay. If you're uncomfortable in that situation, you need to stop. It is your name on the line. It's your reputation, your business. And if anything triggers as a red flag, whether it's in person or online, that's an immediate no. And I've actually had a session where I've done that with. It was a client. He was in a nursing home. His sister was trying to have him get a power of attorney for her because she was trying to help him. And her intent really was to help him. The nursing home was trying to help him, but he would not talk to me on that session. Wouldn't say a word, wouldn't say hi. He'd give me the evil eye and would turn and not look and ignored me. And I was like, I'm sorry. if he's not willing, we're not doing this. And I was able to shut the session down. And luckily, that's the other big benefit of Ron is that I don't have to worry about a confrontation. If I'm saying no, it's literally a click of a button and I'm done.
What a good point.
Easy.
No, I love that you bring that up because I think it's a almost irrational response to think, oh no, there's going to be fraud on the technology side. And it ignores the fact that there's a lot of fraud on the human side. So it doesn't matter whether they're sitting in front of us or on the computer. There's a risk for fraud, which is why our position exists in the first place, is to help prevent the fraud in the first place. And I think that really highlights the importance of knowing your stuff, right? Like just because you're an online notary or a remote online notary doesn't mean that you don't need to know your state laws and that you don't need to know how to perform your duties as a notary public. What advice do you have people along those lines?
Oh, I want to completely emphasize that statement, and I'm going to expand upon it, because knowing your notary laws for a traditional notary is great, but knowing your notary laws for an online notary is a whole separate ball of wax. And when you do it online, when you're doing it in person, there's a good chance you might get a document from somewhere else once in a while. But the majority of the stuff you're doing is for locals, and locals are going to have local documentation. I want to say 70% of the time. But when you're doing it online, you most likely will be dealing with people from all over the place. You're going to see notarial certificates from Nevada or Kentucky, where Kentucky, they aren't required to have a stamp. So they're not going to have a place for you to affix your stamp. Or you're going to see international adoption documents, and they're going to be drawn up by like Germany. And now that notarial area looks nothing like the ones in the States. And you've got to make sure that you're conforming all of these documents to meet your state laws. And they are so vast. Here in Ohio, it's pretty simple. I just have to put it was done online, basically. But if you're in a state like Indiana or Montana, you have to put the physical location of the signer in your notary block. And you also have to put that it was online and all these other things. But the idea behind it is every state is different with their RON laws. And you need to understand that. And then I'll throw in one more little if on this. If you're doing a document, when this isn't even the notarial certificate, let's say I'm doing a will for a client who's got a property in Florida, that their life is in Florida. It's going to go to Florida probate. There are specific questions in the Florida probate law that are required with an electronic notarization. And if you don't ask those in the video, they will throw it out. And no one will know until after they're dead if you did or didn't follow the law. And it's not notarial law, it's probate law. So you've got to really, really be comfortable with what you're doing. And it's a lot. And I hear that a lot. Amy, my goodness, you train on so many different things, but every single one of them come out of it saying I'm a better Ron for it.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think most notaries are overwhelmed with just the state statutes or the handbook. They don't even think to check out probate code or even the power of attorney laws in their state. But that's huge. And I think that's part of going all in as pro on this.
Oh, definitely. And also being able to answer simple legal questions by the clients. And I'm not saying give legal advice. I'm physically in California. And right now, California doesn't have RON. It's not legal. I can't use this because it's not legal here. That's not entirely true. The law in the state pertains to the notaries in the state. The law does not pertain to the signers. So making sure you differentiate the fact that that law, that governing law of California, only restricts the notaries in California. It doesn't restrict the citizens of California. The citizens of California can use RON. They could use RON since 2012. And technically, it's been on the books in California law since 2000.
Right. Yeah, that's when was it that the electronic signature law got passed?
Correct. The e-sign law, the federal e-sign law did. And California adopted an act that specifically states that they will acknowledge an illegally electronically signed document from an online notary.
Yes. And I mean, the reality is, in that scenario, the receiving party of the document, right, is the ultimate decider. So if the receiving party says, yeah, we'll take a remote online notarization, you're good to go.
Correct. However, you never want to ask the receiving party, will you take an online notarization? Because 80% of them aren't going to know what that is.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. So same with, do you know what RON is? Well, do you know what an online notarization is? They're going to go deer in the headlights. What? No, I don't know what that is. What I tell clients to ask is ask them if they will accept electronic signatures. Simple, clear-cut, common terminology. If they say yes, then they'll take an electronic notarized document.
Great workaround. I love that. I love how you've flipped the script to help notaries sell it. And this is going to come circle right back to how you pretty much started the conversation. Now we talked about some of the challenges, the obstacles, the details of this. And despite all that, there's still tremendous opportunity here. Like when you tell me that 80% of people don't know what a RON is anyway, so don't ask that question. I see opportunity. I see that this thing is just really opening up here. So tell me in your opinion, what's the opportunity here for a notary public?
Oh, I think it's vast. But at the same time, I think it's going to be, you need to be out there and doing it and be good at it. Because the moment that you're not good at it, that client has a world of other notaries they can go to now instead of just another notary down the street. So if you're going to specialize in it, really specialize in it. Create that great customer service. But as far as opportunities go, there's so many different areas. And I will tell you, my client base consists of 4 title agencies, just 4. And they keep me busy enough that I can't take on more clients. And I know when you're doing mobile signings, I hear all the time, sign up for at least 100 companies. You won't want to do that with RON. You want to be the best for those 4 or 5 companies. And you want to be their go-to for just them. Because then you're going to get all of their work and you're not going to be able to expand and do a whole bunch. You're not going to have to worry about location as long as you're doing a great job for those 5 agencies. But there's also the world of general notary or specialty notary. Those are a lot more receiving on the electronic signature standpoint. Right now, we still have some issues with electronic signatures in the way of financing. So new buys or refis, you're not going to see those unless it's extremely special circumstance. And the reason for that is banks, they don't always hold that loan. And when they go to sell it to another institution, they have difficulty when it's an electronically signed document. There's not very much trust that it was done correctly when you transfer that. So banks are a little hesitant to jump onto that bandwagon. They're wanting to. It's not that they don't want to, but they need to make sure they have all of the checks and balances. And part of this is that they need to make sure the notary did it correctly, because there's no fixing it and they can actually see that it was done wrong. They get the video, they get the audit trail, they get the document. And if you see the audit trail and the document don't match, well, there's a problem. If you see a signature was applied after the video stopped, there's a problem. If you see the signer drops off of the video and the notary doesn't stop it, it's a problem. And now they can't sell that loan because that notarization is technically illegal. And it all falls with the notary.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a huge layer of complication on the secondary market there too. So I've been hearing the same thing. That's part of the resistance on adoption with loans. But you mentioned specialty notary work and general notary work, which is I have just with some of the students that I've been able to coach over the last couple of years during the pandemic, it has been going crazy with business. So but again, it comes down to how to sell it, where to find customers. So in your experience, how would a notary who's on an independent platform like Cyberize It, right? Or any of the other platforms out there, how do they find more customers for Ron?
So let me tell you what I did. And I'm not going to say this works for everyone because, I started this as kind of a hobby.
Crazy hobby.
Really well into my hobby now. But so January 1st, 2021, I did my first RON. I did it with my best friend. Both of us were technical. It went okay. Well, bumps here, there, just learning the platform. And I loved it after that. After that, I got it. I was like, this opens the doors for me for so many different ways. So I went to Thumbtack and I created a local profile and I thought, okay, let me see if I can convert these these leads. And it was okay. I wasn't getting very many leads, and it was kind of a hard sell. So then I thought, I need to quit thinking about my area. My area is the world. We've got to change our focus, our mindset. We always think in person right here. Well, I'm not limited by distance anymore. So I took Thumbtack to a new level. I now have 57 profiles, and you can do that on Thumbtack. On the same profile, I can have 57 locations. I can have more than that, but I stopped at 57. And I turned it on, and I paid a good deal of money. Don't get me wrong. I paid a good deal of money, but it got my name out there. And now I have a lot of reoccurring clients that come back to me, and my profiles are turned off. So I don't pay for it anymore. I might turn it on once in a while when I'm bored. It's not very often anymore. But that's how I started it. And I said, I built my entire profile about online notarization, answered questions about it in my profile. And I built up those reviews of people that were using me on there. And then I got more trust by other clients on that platform. And then it just kind of snowballed. And from day one to get to a point where I was making good overall gross sales in a week, it took me 7 weeks, but I worked it hard. I was available at a moment's notice to do it. I would drop everything to make the sale. And that's how you build a business. You've got to jump in head first, get wet, and you've got to be all in, and you've got to sacrifice. So I took my laptop anywhere I went. I, made sure that if that ping went off that there was a lead, I was the first one. I was texting, I was calling, and I was ready to sell it no matter what. Dinner got put on hold, food got burnt, but that worked for me. Now, when I say gross sales, that does not mean profit.
Huge difference sometimes, right? Yeah.
Yes. And that's kind of where it led me into looking at the different platforms, because I was gaining between 15 and 2,000 a week in gross sales in onesie, twosie stamps. So I was doing a lot of notarizations, but I was paying about 60% of that in platform fees. And then I was paying Thumbtack.
You're barely scraping by.
I was barely seeing a profit, but you got to think, I was building a business. You're not going to see a profit right from the get-go. And that's another thing that notaries need to understand. You've got to go into this planning not to make money for at least in the short term, because your money goes into investing in yourself. Even if you do turn a profit, you've got to put it back out. Business cards, advertising, expanding your market visibility. But I got to thinking, I'm like, there's got to be another way.Maybe I'm on the wrong platform for this. I didn't see a good pricing structure. And I'm in a state that allows $25 signature. For the notary stamp. So there was potential to make a profit on some transactions. If they had 2 or 3 stamps, I could. But if it was a 1 stamp document, which the majority of specialty or general notary work is, by the time I took out all the fees, I was only getting a couple dollars. So that's what triggered me to start really looking at platforms.
Where did that lead you?
Well, I tried another one. And this one is the one that the straw that broke the camel's back. I looked at this platform. I did a demo on it with my daughter, and I was like, okay, better pricing, simple enough, but it made her create a profile. And I went, I wonder what she sees. And this is something you should always check when you're doing something. Because mind you, here I am looking at this platform. I've got 200-300 people in my client list now that do repeat business with me that I'm going to transfer over if I do. And I logged in as her, and I saw a button that said, start a notarization. I'm like, cool, right? She can start something with me. I don't have to do it. And I went through the process, and it connected me to the owner's wife.
Oh my gosh.
I was livid to the point. This is how tedious I am. I found the owner's cell phone number through public records, and he got a personal phone call from me. And I don't think he realized how serious I was when I told him he would never see a dime of my money and I would build a platform better than his.
Wow. And you did.
I did.
I love a good origin story, Amy, but I just did not expect that. And I love that you turned that experience into Cyberize It.
Well, I wanted something that really worked, and I could see where it didn't work. There's so many limitations within many platforms. If something goes wrong, you don't have the ability to instantly fix it or correct it. And I was spending tons of money just in my own errors, not knowing that I was doing it wrong until we're in the session. Oh, I tagged it wrong. Okay, now we've got to start over. Oh, the signer forgot their middle initial. Oh, now we got to start it over. And there are some platforms out there that every time you start over, it could cost the notary almost $60 per transaction. I mean, I think that's where they cap it at, is what it is. The most you'll get charged is. And I'm like, that's not cool. That we don't get much as it is. And now we're getting penalized. And, and I didn't like the lack of support on a lot of platforms. When I needed it. And I knew enough to get around, but if we're really running into a roadblock, I need help. And clients can't wait a week. If we don't close on this sale, they lose it. And I could be at fault for that, because I didn't have the technology ready to go to get it done. And I didn't want to be the reason that it failed. So yeah.
All right. And so Cyberize It took all of those pain points for notaries. And how did you solve it?
So I went to the drawing board and I collected a whole lot of research on the current platforms. And I looked at who they used as vendors. And I analyzed which ones did what in order to pick the one that I thought would be the best one for me. I think I looked at ID verification, and I looked at document encryption. Because if I'm going to put my name and seal on a document, I want to know that it can't be altered. And I noticed in a few platforms, I'm not going to say all, but quite a few, that after they were done, it was very easy to manipulate that document after the fact. Not legal, but you could manipulate them after the fact. And I'm like, I don't want that. I want my clients, I want my notaries to know that when you put your name and your seal on that document, if it is altered, it's visibly altered. And could it be faked? Everything can be faked. Don't get me wrong. But I wanted it to be the hardest it could be. And I think I've achieved that. We partnered with Adobe Sign, which is one of the most encrypted aspects of document encryption that I could find.
All right. And then you mentioned support. How do you help notaries either perform their duties or build their business? Besides you being awesome on Clubhouse and sharing so much information.
Well, one, I do, as much as you see me online, I'm here on the phones too. So when someone calls, we try to answer and get that done. Unless I'm in a session, I still do notarizations. But let's talk about support when you're in a session. When you're in a session with a client, you have the ability, our support number is literally on the screen. So if you run into a snag, you could shoot a text message. The client doesn't even need to know that you're asking. You can take a picture of the screen and we can tell you where to click if you have to. I mean, sometimes you just get that deer in the headlights moment and you're like, oh, what now? Or, I forgot to add my loose certificate. How do I do that? Things of that nature. And that text line, that support line that's dedicated for in sessions is responded to 24/7. Somebody that is a notary will always respond to those messages or answer the phone. Might be a little sleepy, but we'll answer the phone. Now, that's how we handle the in progress sessions, because those are important. If it's something that's not so urgent, we ask that you text us or email us, and we respond to that usually within 24 hours at the top, 24 consecutive hours. But I'm known for responding while I'm multitasking. So a lot of times you'll get a message saying that I responded from my cell phone, because usually it's a quick answer. As far as marketing, we offer something I don't think any other platform offers. So when you join in our system, you get access to a whole bunch of templates. So anything that we design as a company to advertise, you can take that image, customize it for your branding, and use that same sales pitch for your own business venture with us. So I always like to say, we're a hybrid platform, and our independent contractors are basically, a tool with us, but you're powered by Cyberize It. Your platform isn't Cyberize It. You're powered by Cyberize It, because that gives the client the knowledge that they're dealing with the local notary, and local again is relative, but you have this conglomerate, and they don't need to know it's only two people in the office, that they have this conglomerate behind it that says, we're powered by this larger organization. And so now you've given precedence to the process. Not only are notaries hearing me talk about this, I go in rooms and I talk about this with all kinds of prospective clients. When someone hears about us, they hear about us from all different perspectives. I've done radio ads about online notarization. I've taken press releases, and, when we have our name on all of these states approved lists, that gives precedence to the validity of our platform. Being MISMO certified, being in 30 plus states in one U.S. territory, people see your name over and over and over again. And I want the notaries to have that continuity. So you're not just some random notary saying, oh, we can do virtual notarization. As soon as you say something that triggers the client to go, oh yeah, I've heard about that. Tell me more. Because it takes like 7 or 8 touches before a consumer becomes a client. And usually they'll hear about us at least 2 or 3 times before you make that first touch. So this lightens your load in marketing. And now I don't want to take your clients. That's not my goal. But we do offer the support that if you're busy, they can connect to somebody else for that one time, but they always come back to you.
That sounds like a nice, healthy balance. So the customer gets taken care of, because I don't think any notary wants their clients to be left hanging. So that's a beautiful way of doing things. Now, you talked about a couple of things here about what you did, Thumbtack, your marketing endeavors, your images and things like that, which ties into the digital presence. How does search engine optimization play into success as a RON, do you think?
That one's harder. Because let's take Google, for instance, because I know you've been doing a lot of Google classes. I spoke to Jim and asked him about, with my company being virtual, I can do anyone, anywhere. How do I get into that SEO with Google? And he said, it's really not for that kind of demographic. It's for the local business down the street kind of thing. So it's very hard in that aspect. One thing that I've discovered helps is to check into these different areas on Facebook with an ad. So one day I'll check in that I'm in Spain. I'll check in that I'm in Mexico City with an ad about virtual notarization. And it puts it on the map for that city, because people will look at that. And then when people search and they're in that city, they'll find me there. So you'll see me just randomly checking in all over the world. I'm not really there. I'm still in Ohio, but you see what I'm going at. It is harder, though, to get out there in that demographic. The other aspect is you've got to watch where you target your audience, because if I start advertising in Spain, I'm limited to only certain documents that are dealing with the U.S. Either they come from the U.S. or they're going to the U.S. So I don't want to waste my money on the people in that country that need a document for their own country, because that's not going to help me. I can't do it. So you've got to really watch the demographic of how you try that search engine optimization. You can do it. You can be fancy with it, but sometimes it kind of bites you in the butt.
Well, I think what you're speaking to is knowing who your ideal customer is, right? So it's probably expats that are living outside the U.S. There's probably certain circumstances like adoptions and employment and things like that, where you can get really specific depending on whatever niche you want to break down. What is coming to me, and I've seen some notaries starting to do this, is very similar to what you're doing. And I haven't seen your written content, but I know on Clubhouse you're just delivering value. So have you seen, because this is so new for the general public, and there's so many people who don't understand it, by producing content, whether it's blogs, vlogs, videos, podcasts about the topic, is that a way that notaries can drive traffic to their website and their business?
Oh, definitely. I actually had one of the notaries on the platform bring me on to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about the top 10 questions customers have when it comes to doing a notarization online. And it went over really well, and she had quite a few calls from it afterwards. So it's all about education. People don't know what they don't know until you tell them, and presenting that option, and if this is an area that you're wanting to make your niche, or you're wanting to convert more of your business to it, especially with these gas prices, is offer it. I always say this, and you'll hear me say it on Clubhouse. You always lead the client with where you want them to go. You get the phone call. I need a notary. Are you a notary? I Googled you. I found you. Well, yes, I am. How can I help you? Well, I have this document I need done right away. Wonderful. Did you know we can do this all from your cell phone? I don't even talk about going in person. And they're like, what do you mean? All from my cell phone? You have to come here. You've got to put that crimper on my document, Oh no, we've changed. It's great. It's fantastic. And then I go into my spiel. I tell them how it's safer, how it's faster, and how it has value for years, because it can be validated through the signatures or through the video for at least 10 years. So if there's ever a question, we can pull it right back up.
I love that. So we talked about the digital component of this. What about relationships? How do relationships tie into a Ron's success? Can you still get referrals for business?
Oh, that's how I get a lot of stuff. My clients refer me to everyone, and they continually come back. So like, there's a client, my oldest client, my youngest at heart, we'll put it that way. She was 101 years old.
Wow.
And she had to prove her life that she was alive for her retirement in Japan. So the nursing home did it. We did oath of credible witness because she's 101 years old. So, anyway, she got on there and she's like, I can't believe I'm doing this. And then she would repeat it in Japanese. It was awesome. And so we would go through. And, that nursing home continually used me after that. So they used me for all of their notarizational needs. And that was in the height of the pandemic. So they wouldn't have contacted me if they were able to get a regular notary. It was just pure luck that they put that out there, that they needed something and they needed a solution. And we found it. And now I get residual business from it. Yeah. I get a lot of house flippers. Once they come on and they're able to do a virtual sell of their property, it's constant. Another one that I get a lot of are, and this is something I don't know if you see very often, but the unclaimed money from the state holds.
Yeah.
After it's so much money, they have to have a document notarized for somebody to facilitate helping them get it. And I get a lot of those type of clients as well.
That's amazing. I'm always fascinated by how many weird niches there are in this business. That's one I had not heard of yet. So thank you so much for sharing that. Amy, is it possible to build a business for a notary just as Ron?
I did. So the short answer is yes, it's possible. Is it easy? That's a different question. No, it's frustrating. It's for every yes, I'm going to see 6 or 7 no's. It isn't something that's going to happen overnight, but I don't think any business is.
Right.
You're going to get that aspect of, okay, maybe not for me. Okay, we're going to have to do it in person, or, it's just too much and too hard. Okay. But the idea is understand which ones could lead to a good sale and which ones aren't. And then decide, okay, am I giving up on it or am I changing and doing it in in-person session? It doesn't, just because I did it all online doesn't mean everyone else has to. You all have your own businesses. It's how you see your business plan growing. And I try to emphasize that is everyone's entitled to do their own thing. And they're encouraged to do their own thing. The world needs it all. But there's room for just the mobile. There's room for just the ones in the office. There's room for the ones that do it online. And then there's room for ones that do it all. And they scatter. So yeah, I want to make sure I emphasize on all of that.
So, Amy, what keeps you going when the going gets tough? What's your reason or your why for making this business work?
Oh, there you go. That helped trigger a thought there, because I was kind of like, what's my reason? One, I am determined. When I get into something, I'm going to make it. If I can make it a success, I am going to make it that way. But my why, I'm going to tell you another story. There was a client. She was in the hospital. She was on her deathbed, and her family was surrounded around her, and she needed to do her will. And not every state can do a will online, so keep that in mind. However, I am not restricted on wills, so I was able to help them. And we got through, and we were getting ready to the point where she was about to sign, and the husband's like, well, didn't you want to add this? Or didn't you want to do this? And then, we had to wait for the doctor to come in and do their thing, and we get back, we get back to going on it. And she's like, yeah, okay. So we drag a text box. She adds the terminology she wants on it, and we get through. And, this one signing, it was one signature, two witnesses, and then the notary witnessing the witnesses. It should have taken 10 minutes. Okay. 45 minutes later, we're getting through this, and, my witnessers are kind of like, come on, let's get this over with. But it was the love. He knew the moment that I put my seal on that document, she had permission to leave. She had that release. And these things are life-changing for people. And I mean, it doesn't have to be that kind of sad situation. The flip side is when you do this for adoptions, you are this unique tool in a situation that a client thought was hopeless. There's nothing out there. 5 notaries told me this was completely illegal, and I don't know what to do. I just need a solution. Can you tell me what I can do to get this done that will work? And then I offer them this solution. And it's like, you are their best friend. Mm-hmm. You just changed their life, whether it's for the good. It was for the good in both situations, but whether it's happy or sad, you make that monumental moment. And those clients will never forget that. They come back for everything. And, I get to know kids. I know their kids' names. I see pets. I talk to grandma when she's in the room. I talk to the wife. We tease, we joke. I even wear funny headdresses on Halloween or holidays in general. And it doesn't have to be robotic. And I know if you're on certain platforms, you have a very strict code of ethics or code of conduct. But when you're an independent or on a hybrid platform like mine is, you have the freedom to be you. And how you engage with that client makes all of the difference. And that's why clients love me. I engage. It's not robotic. And I encourage all notaries to have that relationship, whether it's online or in person.
What a beautiful way to bring our session to a close, Amy. It's so obvious that you're in this business for the right reason. And thank you for that. I agree. I think this work matters. And we often meet people on their best days and their worst. And they need somebody they need a human being. And when we can bring that to the office that we hold here, I think that's where the real magic happens. So thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself, details about your platform. And if somebody was interested in checking out Cyberize It or getting in your orbit, where could they go?
Well, the first place is always the website, cyberizeit.com. We tell people don't just notarize it, cyberize it. And other than that, you can find me on Clubhouse. We have a Wednesday night, actually tonight. Today's Wednesday. I don't know when you're listening to this radio thing, but Wednesday nights at 7:30 Eastern in the Everything Notary Clubhouse room. We do a show. It's about an hour and a half, 2 if it's a really good show. But you can always hear us there. And of course, you can reach out via phone or email. All of our contact information is published on our website.
All right. I love that open contact, Amy. Again, thank you so much for being here. Truly appreciate you.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate the time today.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Sign and Thrive podcast for notaries, brought to you by the Notary e-Journal. Notaries all over the country, including California, are raving about this journal, but don't take my word for it. Hear what Keon has to say.
This is Kai and Angelo from California. One of the biggest things I love about the Notary e-journal is the fact that it makes everything a lot more easier and convenient for me and my signers. One of the biggest feedback that I've had is the fact that my signers do not have to go get their fingers dirty with the ink when it's time to complete the Notary journal itself. In addition to that, it has saved me a lot of time during my signings and has made things a lot more easier for me to organize and prepare in case I ever have to surrender my Notary journal to a peace officer.
Thanks, Kian. You hear that, folks? Nobody likes dirty fingers. Save time, make money, and keep your clients' fingers clean. Try the Notary eJournal today for just $1 at notarycoach.com/eJournal.